Hi, my name's Christine Padgett. I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Psychological Sciences at the University of Tasmania, and I was awarded a Churchill Fellowship in 2024. My fellowship is on the issue of brain injury caused by intimate partner violence. I'm aware that this topic can be difficult for some people, and so before I go on, I'd just like to warn viewers that I will be talking about intimate partner violence and the ways in which the brain can be injured as a part of that violence. So, if this might be distressing for you, please consider whether you want to continue watching. Before talking about my project, I'd like to briefly describe intimate partner violence and brain injury in the context of intimate partner violence, to make sure that what I'll talk about makes sense to everyone. Intimate partner violence refers to any violent or abusive behaviour that occurs during or after an intimate relationship. Typically, the violence is repeated and ongoing. It may be physical, but it can also be sexual, emotional, economic, or psychological. Sadly, we know that about 1 in 4 women and 1 in 14 men over the age of 15 experience this type of violence in Australia. While many people are aware of intimate partner violence, what is less well recognised is that brain injuries can occur as a result of the physical violence. If someone is hit in the face or head, violently shaken, or pushed over in a way that violently jolts the head, they can experience concussion, which is a type of mild brain injury, or they may sustain a more severe brain injury. Those physical forces can damage the brain through rapid movement. But what is less well known is that restricting oxygen also very quickly damages brain cells and therefore can cause brain injuries. Some examples of how this happens in intimate partner violence include non-fatal strangulation, sometimes referred to as choking, or smothering someone's face, or applying excessive pressure to the upper body. All of these actions can reduce or stop a victim survivor from breathing, reducing blood supply to the brain, which in turn can cause a brain injury. Evidence shows that the majority of people who experience intimate partner violence will have at least one injury that could cause this sort of damage, and in fact are likely to experience multiple injuries. The symptoms people experience following a brain injury vary greatly, both in terms of severity and duration, and can include changes to thinking, emotions, bodily senses and movement. Recovery from a brain injury can be relatively fast for some people, with symptoms being mild and lasting only hours or days. But for others, symptoms and changes can be severe and/or lifelong. And we know that experiencing multiple injuries, as often happens in intimate partner violence, can lead to longer and more serious consequences, even when an individual injury may be classed as mild. Further complicating the picture, some people might experience a mix of types of injury. For example, blows to the head, violent shaking, and non-fatal strangulation, all of which can impact the brain in different ways, leading to more complex outcomes. Brain injury caused by intimate partner violence has not been well recognised, partly due to 2 factors. Firstly, societal taboos about talking about intimate partner violence mean that many victim survivors are unable or afraid to disclose their experience. Because of this, intimate partner violence has been referred to as a hidden epidemic by the World Health Organization. Further complicating this issue is the nature of brain injuries. Brain injury is often referred to as an invisible injury because there are often no external signs of injury, even if a person experiences profound functional changes. Sadly, because the injuries are invisible, often those changes are seen as the person behaving unusually for no reason, leading to stigma and discrimination. In short, brain injury caused by intimate partner violence can be thought of as an invisible injury in a hidden epidemic. And as a result, despite there likely being a large number of people who sustain a brain injury due to intimate partner violence, this issue has received limited attention or recognition. And it's important to note that victim survivors often have to navigate legal and healthcare settings at a time when they may be experiencing the symptoms of a brain injury. These systems can be confusing and stressful at the best of times, but can seem insurmountable when you're experiencing symptoms such as memory problems, fatigue, difficulty responding to stress. So it's crucial that we recognise this issue and learn how to better support people. The aim of my fellowship was twofold. Firstly, I wanted to hear from a range of people, those with lived experience of brain injury caused by intimate partner violence, people working with them, and researchers who are doing cutting-edge work exploring the consequences of brain injury in the context of intimate partner violence. I wanted to learn what people thought research should be focusing on and how I might be able to contribute to that. Secondly, I wanted to learn what people either with lived experience or working in the field knew about brain injury caused by intimate partner violence, so that I can develop educational resources that address people's needs, either in their workplaces or lives. These two objectives led me to visit an incredibly varied range of people and places, and so the findings of my project will be useful for people who work with people who experience intimate partner violence. For example, healthcare workers, frontline workers such as police and paramedics, people working in social support services, and legal professionals. It will also be helpful for people with lived experience of intimate partner violence and their families. Lastly, researchers working in the area of intimate partner violence or brain injury will also likely find this report useful. In September and October of 2025, I travelled to the USA and Canada. Starting in Toronto, Canada, I travelled to Kitchener and Montreal. Then, in the USA, I visited New York City, Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Columbus, Ohio, Salt Lake City, and Lincoln, Omaha, and North Platte in Nebraska. I then returned to Canada to visit people in Vancouver, Vancouver Island, and Kelowna. All up, I travelled to 24 different locations across 10 states and provinces. The people I met broadly fell into 5 categories: researchers, healthcare workers, social service workers, people in the legal setting, and people who had experienced a brain injury due to intimate partner violence. I want to recognise that some of the people working and researching in this space also had experienced their own brain injury due to intimate partner violence, and so they also provided extra insights. Within each area, I talked to people who had a range of roles. In healthcare, I talked to neurologists, occupational therapists, nurses, psychologists, practice managers, and a number of others. In the social services area, I talked to social workers, people working in women's shelters, people who worked in organisations focused on intimate partner violence and domestic violence more broadly. Others whose areas of expertise was working with people who had experienced brain injuries. In the legal setting, I visited courts and prisons to talk to lawyers and magistrates. And I also met with prison inmates who had experienced brain injuries and had been both perpetrators and survivors of intimate partner violence. I talked to victim survivors who were from a range of backgrounds, people living in rural and urban areas, some who had disabilities, others who were from Indigenous communities. This range of interactions allowed me to get an insight into the people and places victim survivors of intimate partner violence need to engage with, both at times of crisis and in the longer term. It helped me see some of the specific challenges that they, and those working with them, face. I could also see how having a brain injury would impact on how victim survivors were able to navigate those interactions. It also allowed me to identify new and important avenues for research, both from the perspectives of all the groups that I met with and through exploring ideas with other researchers. Importantly, I was also able to learn about what gaps there might be in people's knowledge of brain injury caused by intimate partner violence, and what might be useful for developing educational materials. As much as I'd love to talk about all the things that I learned, for the purpose of this report, I want to focus on 5 key things. Firstly, there are unique challenges in identifying if someone may have sustained a brain injury as a result of intimate partner violence. There are a number of reasons why brain injury often remains unrecognised in the context of intimate partner violence, and the signs and symptoms can be missed both in the acute and longer term. This is due to a number of reasons. Injuries may be unrecognised because the victim survivor may feel ashamed about the violence and never even tell anyone about their experience. And they may be unaware that the violence they experienced could have caused a brain injury. For example, some victim survivors I spoke to had experienced repeated non-fatal strangulation, but did not realise that that sort of injury can injure the brain. Furthermore, during the crisis response to a violent incident, those responding may not realise a brain injury has occurred or know what to ask to determine if there is a chance of a brain injury. and this can have serious consequences for the victim survivor. For example, after a brain injury, people can be confused, slur words, and even become aggressive, which, in the context of responding to a violent incident, may make it appear as though the victim survivor is the aggressor or is under the influence of a substance such as alcohol. Alternatively, if a survivor goes to hospital or a women's shelter, there may be more visible injuries or more pressing matters to deal with, like finding safe housing. Several people I talked to who work in that acute response space talked about the fact that they had so much to do that even if they were aware that a brain injury was a possibility, asking about it at that time would not be easy. It's completely understandable that identifying risk of brain injury is challenging during that crisis response, even though it can be very important to be aware of. This highlighted to me two things. Firstly, we need to make sure that people working with victim survivors and the survivors themselves are aware that brain injury is a risk. Secondly, while ideally screening for or asking about a possible brain injury should occur at the time of injury, it can also be done later when the workers and the victim survivor might have more time to consider whether a brain injury has occurred and whether it might be causing ongoing issues. So we need to talk to people and encourage them to think about brain injury at various time points and in various settings. I also learned that misattribution of longer-term symptoms can also occur. For example, I heard from some survivors that they felt that healthcare professionals and others who were supporting them assumed that any expression of cognitive and emotional symptoms came from psychological trauma rather than being the effects of physiological damage associated with brain injury. This is important as it can lead to misdiagnosis, being sent to the wrong type of health professional, and receiving the wrong type of treatment. It's also frustrating for the victim survivor if they feel like they're not being listened to. For example, one person who had left their violent relationship many years ago said they were confident they had addressed the psychological harms that had occurred, but were still experiencing the long-term symptoms of brain injury. But when they sought help, they were referred to a counsellor because it was assumed that their concerns were psychological. The second point I want to raise is that brain injury symptoms can lead to specific risks and harms for victim survivors navigating health and legal services. The more places I visited, the more it became clear that the effects of brain injury could have specific impacts, specifically for navigating the legal and medical processes that many victim survivors need to go through when intimate partner violence has occurred. For this report, I'll focus on two symptoms: memory problems and sensitivity to light. Most people probably know that brain injury can cause short or long-term memory impairments. But if the brain injury isn't recognised, as is often the case in intimate partner violence, these changes to memory can make the person seem unreliable or may even make it appear as though they're not telling the truth because they may be vague, have gaps in their memory of events, or change their story. This can be a serious issue if the person is being interviewed by police, or later if they need to provide evidence in court. It can impact whether they're believed and could influence decisions around whether a perpetrator of violence is held accountable or impact on child custody or other legal processes. Memory impairment can also lead to missed appointments. If we think about that in the context of medical care, people may miss an appointment and then it may be some time before they can get another one, delaying or possibly even stopping their medical treatment. Sensitivity to light is probably a less well recognised effect of brain injury, but it is relatively common, especially in the shorter term. This means that if people are in bright rooms, especially with fluorescent lighting, they can feel distressed, get headaches, and not be able to concentrate. Again, thinking about this in the context of legal or medical settings, this might mean the person has trouble talking or remembering events when in a brightly lit room, or find it hard to answer questions in a medical examination. Making sure people are in environments that they feel comfortable in doesn't just benefit the person, it may help them to provide better information or engage in therapy. I saw an amazing example of this in Chicago, where I visited the Pathways Clinic, which is providing medical care for people who have experienced intimate partner violence. The clinic recognises that many of their patients may have a concussion or other form of brain injury, And so the medical rooms in the clinic all have dimmable lights. To help people with memory problems, they made sure that people didn't only get timely reminders about their appointments, but they also made sure the person had a plan on how to get to the appointment. They also allowed longer appointment times and provided written notes so that their patients did not need to remember everything. They provided care packs on a range of things to help people manage their symptoms, including notebooks to record information, tinted glasses to reduce light, and eye masks for sleeping. Thinking about this in the Australian context, I'd really like to encourage people working with victim survivors, including medical professionals and people working in legal settings, to explore how they might be able to modify their working environment to make sure people who may have experienced brain injury are comfortable. Most changes can be relatively inexpensive and simple to do. Having dimmable lights in a medical examination room or a police interview room or courtroom would be ideal. But even if that's not possible, having different light sources, lower wattage lamps for example, can make the environment more manageable for the survivor. Having an appointment reminder protocol that means the person gets reminders at an appropriate time, or even helping someone put a reminder on their phone, could reduce missed appointments, which is beneficial for everyone. Providing people with some small supports like the care package you saw on the image could also be helpful. Of course, it is crucial not to assume that everyone who has experienced intimate partner violence has these symptoms. We should not automatically be putting people into low-lit rooms, for example. Asking the person how they're feeling and specifically inquiring about whether they're experiencing symptoms associated with brain injuries is important, and leads nicely to my next point, which is, how should we conceptualise trauma in relation to intimate partner violence? One of the things the Churchill Fellowship trip helped me to think about more deeply was the concept of trauma-informed care in the context of intimate partner violence in general, and especially when a brain injury has occurred. The intent of trauma-informed care is to ensure that people's past history of trauma is taken into account when they're receiving medical care or in other settings such as legal environments. The type of trauma that this model focuses on is typically psychological. However, I think in the context of intimate partner violence, we need to broaden that and also routinely consider physiological trauma, given the likelihood someone may experience a brain injury. In other words, if we think about trauma for this group as comprising of both psychological and physiological elements, we will be better placed to support that person in a way that meaningfully takes their lived experience into account. Again, we shouldn't make assumptions, and checking with people about what their individual experience is integral to providing good care. My last 2 points relate to people's knowledge of brain injury in intimate partner violence. So, first of all, what do victim survivors know about brain injury caused by intimate partner violence, and what do they want to know? When I listened to victim survivors' stories, it was clear that many people didn't realise the injuries they had sustained could cause a brain injury. This was in part because of the focus on the psychological trauma, and in part because concussion and other brain injuries are less visible and less recognised than physical injuries. People might see a black eye or a broken nose and treat that injury without realising the physical force that caused that injury may also cause the brain to be jolted or impacted in a manner that can also cause injury. And, as I mentioned earlier, other injuries like non-fatal strangulation are often not even recognised as being a potential cause of brain injury. A concern I had before my visit was whether providing survivors with education would be seen as either pointless or distressing if they were not able to access healthcare, or if they'd experienced their injuries a long time ago. However, it became clear when talking to people that learning about brain injury was something that was seen as empowering and important, regardless of when the injuries had occurred and whether there was opportunities to access healthcare. Simply having that information and learning about some of the causes and symptoms of brain injury allowed people to make sense of what they'd felt at the time of the violence and may be continuing to feel if they had a longer-term brain injury. Some people said they felt less guilt and shame, which they had been feeling because of some of the life activities they struggled with. For example, understanding that their memory had been impacted by having a brain injury meant that they felt less like it was their own fault if they were struggling with daily chores that rely on memory, such as shopping or attending appointments. I was also privileged to observe training that the Brain Injury Association of Nebraska are providing to inmates at the state prison. This tailored education was aimed at people whose brain injury was a potential factor in their imprisonment, and the way this information was presented really helped me realise that my own ways of teaching could be expanded to be more accessible for a range of people. It was also clear that there was some misunderstanding of how a brain injury could be diagnosed. Most people expressed concerns that they had not undergone any brain scans, for example, CT or MRI scans. Of course, it can be important to get a brain scan at the time of injury, but we know that when injuries are mild, brain scans typically don't detect any changes. And a diagnosis can be made in the absence of any brain imaging through careful history taking and assessments. Making sure people are aware of this is important. We don't want people to think that they have to have a brain image to get a diagnosis. And also, we don't want people to assume that if there's no sign of injury on a brain scan, that everything is fine. We know that especially where there are repeated injuries, there can be significant symptoms without any visibility on a brain scan image. As a result of listening to the concerns, I'll make sure that the educational resources I develop help people to have a better understanding of this issue. My final point relates to workers' knowledge of brain injury caused by intimate partner violence. So, what is the current understanding of people working in relevant fields and what do they want to know? People I talked to often said they felt unsure of how to talk about brain injury caused by intimate partner violence because either the brain injury aspect or the intimate partner violence aspect was outside of their area of expertise. People working in the intimate partner violence space often said they felt as if they didn't have enough knowledge about brain injury, and many people working in healthcare or elsewhere talked about finding it hard to ask about intimate partner violence. Adding to this, the nature of health and social care is extremely siloed. In other words, information is not always shared between different providers. This is a common issue in healthcare, where people often work within a specific area and may not be in a position to share knowledge. But one neurologist I spoke to said they thought siloing was at its worst in the brain injury space, even when compared to other complex health issues they worked with. So, this combination of people feeling uncomfortable about talking about either brain injury or intimate partner violence, plus the lack of information sharing, means that victim survivors may not be asked the right questions to allow identification that they may have had a brain injury, or information relating to the brain injury or experience of intimate partner violence may not be being shared between the various people supporting the victim survivor. A key lesson I learned from this is that there needs to be tailored education to support workers in the areas that they're less confident in, so that they can at least feel comfortable asking questions. This can be addressed a number of ways, including formal training, but also by better communication between various organisations and professions. In Canada, I learned about a neurotrauma care pathway, which involves support workers acting as navigators for people with brain injury. Here, the navigator has cross-disciplinary knowledge of the services a person with brain injury might need and can link them into those services. Having a model like this in Australia, which includes knowledge of intimate partner violence, could lead to better connections between services and the people accessing them. Next steps for me will be a combination of research and education. I've already commenced some new research projects collaborating with researchers in Canada, in which we're gathering data in both Australia and Canada on what workers and victim survivors would like to learn about brain injury caused by intimate partner violence, and how they would like that information presented. I'm also working with other researchers in Canada to try and unpack how cumulative brain injuries caused by intimate partner violence might intersect with later life changes, such as perimenopause and menopause, which are also known to impact memory and other functions. Since returning to Australia, I've also met with the CEO of Tasmania's peak body on family violence, the Tasmanian Family and Sexual Violence Alliance, the CEO of the Brain Injury Association of Tasmania, and the CEO of Engender Equality, which is one of the largest intimate partner violence support services in Tasmania. We have discussed future work together, and I'll be doing a webinar on this issue for the Tasmanian Family and Sexual Violence Alliance. In the second half of 2026, I intend to run a series of day workshops across various locations in Tasmania for frontline, healthcare, legal and support workers and any other interested parties on the specific issues that they might experience in the workplace if they're working with people who have experienced brain injury caused by intimate partner violence. This will include presentations from people that I met with on the fellowship that are tailored for specific jobs, and my hope is to be able to offer that education and training in other states and territories soon. Longer term, my plan is to develop online training that both victim survivors and workers can access on an as-needed basis. I also hope to broaden our definition of trauma-informed care to ensure people who have experienced intimate partner violence are supported both in terms of psychological and physiological trauma when they are accessing services. If anyone wants to contact me about research or education on this topic, please feel free to email me at the address on the screen. Also, if anyone has experienced any distress from hearing about this topic, please do contact one of the support services that I've provided details on as well. I want to thank the Churchill Fellowship for this incredible opportunity. It truly was and will continue to be hugely impactful, and I'm extremely grateful. I also want to thank my workplace, and in particular my head of school, Professor Lisa Fower, for her support in ensuring I could undertake this trip. Lastly, I'm deeply grateful to all the people I met on my trip. So many people who generously gave up so much time to talk to me and to take me into places I would find it hard to get access to here in Australia, who also included me in some amazing social experiences. I especially thank those who shared their own experience of intimate partner violence and brain injury. Your openness and willingness to talk about such an emotional and personal experience meant a huge amount to me, and I hope that I can honour that in my future endeavours. Thank you.